Why was everyone so quick to forget the mechanic? At Forward Operating Base Phoenix, soldiers passed her without noticing. Their boots kicked dust across the motor pool, their laughter echoing in groups she was never part of. To them, she was Wrench. Just another pair of grease-stained hands bent over an engine, replaceable, background noise. But Staff Sergeant Nova Anderson had learned that being unseen was its own kind of shield. She crouched beside a Humvee, hands slick with motor oil, the mountain air sharp in her lungs. Kakovia's peaks rose jagged around the base, silent witnesses to years of conflict. Trucks idled in lines. Supply convoys waited on her sign-off. No one cared how she kept them running, only that they did. And she liked it that way. 3 years she had been here, invisible. But invisibility carried a weight. There were moments, quiet pauses in the long afternoons, when she felt something gnaw at her chest. The sound of helicopters leaving without her. The sight of young operators tightening their gear for patrols she would never join. She fixed their engines, patched their vehicles, handed over keys, and then watched them disappear into darkness. And when they came back, if they came back, they never thought of the mechanic. Sometimes she wondered if the silence was punishment, if this was exile disguised as routine. She knew why she was here. On paper, she'd been burned. A transfer due to combat stress, filed neatly in her record after a mission that had gone disastrously wrong. In truth, she was a weapon set aside. Too dangerous to discard, too scarred to parade. So they tucked her into the motor pool, out of sight. She had made peace with that, or tried to. Until the message came. It was late afternoon when her encrypted phone buzzed inside her coveralls pocket. She froze. That vibration, it wasn't supposed to happen, not after all this time. Only 12 people in the world even had the ability to trigger it. Her hand stayed steady, but her pulse quickened as she read the words on the tiny black screen. Package compromised. Execute Protocol Valkyrie. Authorization Omega-7. The wrench in her grip clattered against steel. They had found her, not the soldiers at Phoenix, not the officers who thought she was nothing more than grease and silence. No, the people who lived in the shadows, the ones who knew the truth. Delta Force had just reactivated their ghost. Nova wiped her hands on a rag, mind racing. She replayed the line again, package compromised. 6 assets. That could only mean one thing, a capture. A team somewhere out there had been taken. Her team. Not the men she joked with in the mess hall, not the mechanics who called her Wrench, but her other family, the ones who understood the silence, the ones she had bled with. She tucked the phone away and breathed once, deep and controlled. Then she stood, leaving the half-dismantled Humvee behind as if it no longer mattered. Inside the base comms center, Sergeant Williams glanced up as she entered. Motor pool, what do you need? Patrol summaries, Nova said flatly. Williams squinted. Why would you need those? Vehicle wear logs, I need to track usage. Her voice carried nothing but calm. The art of a lie was in its steadiness. He shrugged, pulling files on screen. Rows of routine reports scrolled by until Nova's eyes caught one detail. SEAL Team Bravo. Departure, 2200 hours. Mission, Shepherd's Watch. Expected return, 600. Current status, 8 hours overdue. 8 hours in hostile territory meant one thing. Capture. Nova's lips pressed together. She turned silently, leaving before Williams could ask more questions. Back in the garage, she moved with precision. A part of her had always known this moment would come, that the quiet days were only camouflage for the storm waiting beneath. She knelt at her workbench and lifted away a panel of steel that no one else knew was loose. Beneath it waited the truth. Encrypted sat phone, custom weapons, tactical gear that hadn't seen daylight in 3 years. She touched each item like it was an old friend, the mask she had hidden away. She dialed a number that officially didn't exist. Control, this is Phantom. Static, then a voice, package compromised, 6 assets confirmed, captured by hostile elements, coordinates incoming, enemy strength estimated at 40 plus, rescue impossible by conventional means. Nova's reply was steady. Request full tactical package, real-time intelligence. Negative Phantom, this is off books. No support, no backup, no acknowledgement. Are you accepting assignment? Her fingers brushed the cold steel of a suppressed rifle. She remembered the men who had laughed past her that morning, never seeing her. She remembered the SEALs, overdue, alive or dead depending on her answer. Affirmative, beginning preparation. Understand, this is voluntary, no extraction guaranteed. If compromised, you're a rogue element. Understood, she said, and ended the call. Silence filled the motor pool again. Only this time it wasn't exile. It was the stillness before violence. She exhaled once and began. Gear laid out in perfect lines, each weapon checked, each magazine counted, night vision lenses adjusted, charges wired. She shed her mechanic's coveralls, the grease-stained armor of invisibility, revealing black tactical fabric beneath. The woman who emerged was not Wrench, she was Phantom. And Phantom had work to do. By dusk, she walked to Major Davidson's office carrying a clipboard. "Sir, need the repair truck out for a parts run. Convoy transmission issue, might take overnight." Davidson barely looked up. "Fine, back by morning formation." Nova nodded. He would never know that he had just authorized a kill mission. She drove through the base checkpoint at 1900, coveralls zipped, hair tied in regulation bun. To the guards, she was still Wrench, heading for parts. Once out of sight, she pulled the truck over. The disguise peeled away, helmet on, boots strapped, weapons loaded. The truck's hidden compartments slid open, revealing the arsenal she had built in secret over months of patient preparation. The stars above Kakovia were sharp, cold, unblinking. Nova looked at them for a long moment, her chest tightening. She thought of the operators out there, bound in some dark room, waiting for rescue that wasn't coming. She thought of the way people here never saw her, not really. She thought of the weight of silence, the years spent fixing engines when her hands had once held rifles. And then she thought of the message, Protocol Valkyrie. There would be no cavalry, no air strike, no company-strength assault. There was only her. She gripped the wheel, feeling calm wash through her veins. Not adrenaline, not panic. That rare, dangerous stillness that had earned her 47 confirmed kills and a place in files most generals would never see. Tonight she wasn't a mechanic. Tonight she was the ghost they had buried alive. And the enemy was about to learn that even silence has teeth. Why did the map feel like a lie under her fingertips? Maps were honest enough on paper, coordinates, ridgelines, grid numbers. But on a mountain at night, they became suggestions. Nova folded the printed overlay into a small square and slid it into the pocket of her tactical jacket, letting its creases catch the weak moonlight. The real map was in her head now, guard rotations memorized, weak points counted, fields of fire laid out like teeth waiting to close. She carried both, the intelligence someone else had drawn, and the knowledge she had earned with cold nights and harder mistakes. Anxiety lived in the small spaces between her breaths, not panic, a thin, precise edge, one that made her senses shave closer to silence. Tonight she felt it as the truck rattled across rock and scrub, as the modified M1078 climbed toward the compound's coordinates. She had driven through worse. She had crawled farther. But the thing about being a single variable in a live equation was that the margin for error narrowed to nothing. She watched the terrain through night vision like a patient predator. Trees became ghostly columns. Ridges turned into black teeth. The compound sat ahead like an old wound in the earth, a converted mining facility carved into a plateau, surrounded by spines of rock that offered both shelter and exposure. From the sat imagery she'd seen, the facility's defenses were stout, guard towers on the corners, a perimeter fence, and a courtyard ringed by concrete buildings. They had about 40 trained fighters inside. 40 men who had tasted success and believed in each other. Belief could be as lethal as a rifle. She remembered the message again. Package compromised. 6 assets, confirmation. She tried not to imagine faces, because faces brought names and names carried weights she had no right to carry. But human shapes forced themselves into her mind. The lean jaw of a SEAL leader, the way someone would roll a cigarette when nothing else made sense, a quiet laugh that meant everything was fine for one small moment. She shook the images away like grit. The pre-dawn hours gave her the cover she needed to move heavy metals without drawing attention. Convoys and supply trucks were always on the roads before sunrise, but she didn't take the main approach. That would be predictable. Instead, she parked the truck below tree line and moved on foot, the harness of the pack fitting like a second skin. Every piece of gear had been checked twice, every contingency whispered into being. Her movements were surgical. There was no swagger, no noise, just the constant calculation of breath, distance, and time. Nova's training had taught her to listen to the mountain. Rocks make tiny, honest sounds when they shift. Dry brush has a scent and a snap. The way wind carries the ghosts of distant radio chatter. She used all of it as she crept closer, each step a study in restraint. At 800 meters, the compound revealed itself through the sweep of her infrared monocular. Shapes shifted. Parked technicals, guard posts, and the dim silhouettes of men moving in practiced loops. She counted, slow and deliberate. 21 obvious figures. 20 makeshift pickup platforms with heavy mounts. The number changed as she scanned, 40 plus when she picked up the motion of distant shadows. Estimation. Margin of error. That's why she planned for the worst. Reconnaissance was not a solitary sport, but she had become an expert in what the rest of the world called improvisation. She probed the periphery and found the first weakness. A generator compound set downhill from the main facility, shielded by a chain-link fence and a single guard. It was the kind of mistake men make when arrogance grows fat. They assume numbers cover neglect. An untouched generator could power lights, comms, and the very life of a compound. Take the heart out and the house groans. She found a route that took her through pockets of rock outcroppings and waist-high grass, each patch a place to disappear. The guard at the generator was a silhouette leaning with a cigarette between his fingers, human enough to miscalculate his own safety. Nova watched him long enough to memorize the tilt of his shoulders, the rhythm of his head turns, the path his eyes followed to the distant road. The timing was perfect. She moved like glass across glass. Silent steps, breath held, the world reduced to the narrow corridor between her and that guard. Her knife was a sliver of night, close, fast, final. She worked without flourish. The moment was meticulous and monstrous in its efficiency. When she slid the body into the shadow behind the generator, she wasn't thinking about the act, she was cataloging outcomes. One less sentry, one weak link closed. That small darkness bought her hours. Not all actions in war were moral victories, some were surgical necessities. She knew that phrase, wrapped it around her shoulders like a jacket too heavy for comfort. It kept her steady. Planting the charge on the fuel line felt almost clinical. She used the smallest explosive she could, enough to sever the generator's ability to give life, not to create a beacon. Wires were taped. A timer was set. She marked the moment, 22:47. The moon was a pale witness. She walked back to the cover of rock and held herself like a thing that must be kept together. Inside the compound, the patrols had an awful human rhythm. Steps, laughter, radio bursts, bored curses. She watched as 2 guards started a loop near a thin section of perimeter where rock formations offered near cover to the fence. Their patrol was lazy, a product of overconfidence. She waited for the older of the 2 to pass and then slid from her hole like a shadow with a plan. The first guard fell soundlessly. The second turned, surprised, then nothing. The suppressed rifle she carried made even the bullet a stealthy thief. She moved through the perimeter like a ghost through a dream. The compound's nighttime watch was unprepared for someone who didn't fit the profile. They expected a band of men to try a frontal assault, or, failing that, A clumsy rescue attempt with too much noise. Not a mechanic who could disappear into the dark and reappear as an instrument of precise violence. The charges she placed were not random. A guard tower set to watch the courtyard, the communications building with spare radios and satellite uplinks, the motor pool where enemy pickups sat waiting for dawn. She thought not of the destruction, but of the paralysis that followed when lights die, radios go dark, and vehicles stop answering keys. Chaos favors the prepared. She crawled along the shadowed wall and found a window into the reinforced building she suspected held prisoners. The SEALs' capture, if their last transmissions meant anything, would have been opportunistic, seized during a reconnaissance push gone wrong, dragged into a holding area meant for human cattle. She peered and found silhouettes. Limbs restrained, heads bowed, men tethered to metal with ropes or straps. Their faces, when she shined a minute IR lens at them, were tired and beaten, but alive. That sight pried something open inside her that training had taught her to keep closed. A small, painful tenderness tightened her chest, the knowledge of who these men could be, breathing, not yet broken. She catalogued their positions, the positions of their captors, and the likely stairways and doors. Escape without bloodshed seemed possible but improbable. She folded and refolded her plan like a practiced gambler shuffling cards. At 23:34, she pressed the detonator. The generator died. For a breath, the compound held its breath with it. Lights sputtered and fell, and the first roar of flames came from the motor pool as one of her carefully placed charges did its quiet work. Panic moved through the facility like a contagion. Men stumbled into the courtyard, torches cut by dark, commands shouted into a void of static. She didn't wait for order. She moved. When the guard tower fell, it took a pillar of smoke with it and the illusion of omniscience. The communications center erupted in wire and flame, radios going silent mid-bellow. The compound's heart stuttered. Nova threaded through the confusion with the pace of someone who had practiced being quick in a slow world. She was surgical, a suppressed round to a sentry on a rooftop, an explosive round to a technical in motion. Each small action shaped the battlefield into the geometry she preferred. She kept seeing them in flashes, muzzle flashes, the sheen of a boot, a hand reaching for a weapon. But mostly she saw the hunched, bound figures behind bars. Her hands, which had so often soothed engines and replaced bearings, were now instruments of unpicking ropes and lifting hope. She moved through the preyed-upon rooms with a speed and care that felt almost parental. It was absurd and beautiful. The woman who had patched tanks was unwrapping men from cruelty. When she breached the reinforced wall, the room sound hit her, a wet, dull thump like a ragged heart, and then the world cleared. She was through concrete and dust, and into a corridor where armed men had the sudden, shocked look of people who expected a different story. 4 of them died before they had thought to react. Her rifle barked like a machine that had been told exactly where to go. "Wrench," the voice she heard was ragged, wounded humor cutting like a blade. Lieutenant Commander Hayes. He had been the planning mind of the team, the one who had the habit of smiling when everything was about to go wrong. "Had to find a parking spot," she said, because the old, small moments of dark humor kept both of them human. She cut the ropes with a knife, hands steady though they trembled inside. He winced, body bruised, but he breathed. He was not done. They moved with a whispered efficiency born of exhaustion and training. Nova handed out weapons carefully, like a nurse slipping a child a bandage. "Situation?" Hayes asked when he could stand. His voice was cracked and unsteady but alert. "Compound compromised. 40 hostiles, estimate 25 left effective. Communications down, vehicles destroyed. Extraction vehicle staged 2 clicks north." Her words were a map and a prayer. They needed both. "How many injured?" he asked. "Everyone's carrying ambulatory injuries. You can move." She gave him a medical kit, the kind of kit an operator trusts the way a child trusts a blanket. She, packed for more than gunfights, she'd planned for human bodies needing hands. There was a moment of fragile laughter, impossible, absurd. "You took down this place alone?" Hayes asked, incredulous. "Job description changed recently," she replied. The rescue was not clean. They moved through corridors with bodies like low, silent signposts. She covered the team as they exited the building, as they weaved through the compound toward the north where she had left the truck. The main gate was a choke point, and a skeleton crew of militants had gathered there, trying to rally what cohesion they could muster. Nova watched the machine gun emplacement and gave a nod to a piece of carefully placed lethality that stopped the gun crew in its tracks. One precise grenade. One burst to the embrasure. The rest was movement, her team crossing in a practiced arc, their boots finding places the enemy didn't expect. Outside, the world smelled of burning diesel and metal. Fires flared against the dark like many small flags of grief. The pickup trucks that had been the compound's mobility lay in twisted bones, a part of the plan that had gone perfectly. Enemy fighters ran like men who had forgotten how to be soldiers in anything but routine. Now their routines had been broken into pieces. As they reached the concealed truck, Hayes looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time the look was not just curiosity, it was comprehension. The team's leader, the man who had been held like a ghost and released like a promise, understood that the wrench had been a blade the whole time. How he breathed. "Because some problems don't have standard fixes," she said. The words were small, tired, and true. They piled into the truck as the first hints of night's end bruised the horizon. Behind them, the compound was a place where silence had been violently restored. Ahead, there were miles of rough road and the certainty that this night had not ended but mutated. Their pace was quick but cautious. She drove as if the mountain itself could betray them. Her mind kept tally as they moved, casualties counted, choices catalogued, future implications weighed like lead. There were things she would not name aloud, protocols violated, deniability ensured, lines crossed for the sake of human lives. Each one of those choices would sit against her like a stone. At the base, the medics' lights were small beacons of ordinary tenderness. She parked and helped unload, steady hands becoming caretakers again. Commander Hayes pulled her aside later, away from the hum of bandages and antiseptic. "I need to understand what happened," he said, the words heavy with the weight of those who had been reborn. "We were captured in a fortified position. It should have ended differently. How did you do this alone?" She met his gaze without theatrics. There was a tiredness there he hadn't earned the right to know the depth of. "Sometimes unconventional problems need unconventional solutions," she said. It was a truth that avoided explanation like a wound avoided salt. He nodded, silence folding between them like a short, shared prayer. Behind that quiet, Nova felt something tighten, the knowledge that tonight had changed the rules. Men could no longer believe in the comfortable fiction that a motor pool sergeant was harmless. That fiction had burnt. Later, when she drove back to the motor pool and the rags and the oil, when she pulled on grease-smeared coveralls and returned to the sanctity of the ordinary, something inside her knew a ledger had been updated. She had fixed the immediate problem. 6 lives were saved. 40 enemies eliminated. The mountain would keep its secrets, but the lives of men in a room now known to those who mattered would be rearranged forever. She cleaned her hands slowly at a sink that tasted like iron and fuel. The motor pool hummed at dawn as people drifted into work. No one asked the questions that mattered. They never did. To them, she was wrench, and she preferred it. It was easier to be invisible on paper. Her encrypted phone buzzed before she could hide it away. A single line, package delivered. "Well done, Phantom." She deleted it without response. The message was small and the world was large. Tonight had been a success, but she felt the shadow of another question, one that would keep the ledger open. What happens when the repair you make changes the machine forever? What did silence mean when it followed you home? 3 hours after the rescue, Nova was back in her garage, sleeves rolled up, hands black with grease. The Humvee's engine groaned beneath her touch, valves hissing like stubborn secrets. To anyone walking past, she was the same mechanic she'd always been, wrench. the quiet sergeant who fixed things while the real soldiers fought the real war. No one asked why her truck bore new scratches, why her eyes seemed older than they had yesterday. That was the gift of invisibility. People only see what they expect. But inside Nova's chest was a storm she couldn't shut off. 40 men dead, 6 saved, one mission that never happened. No record, no medal, no report. Just grease on her hands again as though none of it had been real. She told herself she liked it that way, that being unseen meant being safe. But the truth was harder. The truth was that invisibility was lonely. When Major Davidson stopped by at 800 hours, she didn't flinch. He carried a mug of coffee, his voice casual. Anderson, heard SEAL Team Bravo had some incident last night. Their vehicles will need full inspections. I'll get right on it, sir, she answered, not looking up. Good, we can't function without reliable mechanics. Nice work keeping the fleet in order. She forced a nod, pretending the words meant something. He had no idea that while he slept, she had dismantled a fortress and carried 6 bleeding men through fire. In his world, she was just a cog in the machine, and maybe that was best. Still, as he left, she allowed herself a single breath of satisfaction, because she knew the truth. And the truth was heavy but clean. 40 enemies gone, 6 brothers alive. Her phone buzzed again that evening. A single line, package delivered. Well done, Phantom. She deleted it without hesitation, as always. Ghosts didn't keep souvenirs. Yet even as she returned to ordinary routines, she felt the shift ripple through the base. Word spread in quiet channels, whispered between soldiers who'd never say it out loud. SEAL Team Bravo had been rescued, an entire enemy compound destroyed. 0 friendly casualties, but no one could explain how. The official story didn't add up, and in the gaps of silence, rumors grew. Nova ignored them. She tightened bolts, swapped transmissions, stained her hands with oil until the smell of blood was gone. But at night, lying awake in her narrow bunk, she couldn't escape the question. How long could she keep this cover intact before the silence broke? The answer came 6 months later. It was supposed to be a normal morning. She was under a truck, socket wrench in hand, when the black SUV rolled into the motor pool. Not military issue, diplomatic plates. 2 men stepped out, their suits too crisp for dusty roads, their eyes scanning everything with the precision of predators. She knew their type instantly. Intelligence operatives. One spoke softly. Staff Sergeant Anderson, we need to discuss your recent overtime work. Her throat tightened, but she kept her face calm. She set the wrench down, wiped her hands on a rag, and followed them without protest. They led her to a secure briefing building. Inside, the air smelled of cold electronics and paper no one else would ever read. Around the table sat men and women whose suits and uniforms carried more authority than their insignia admitted. She stood at attention, every nerve alert. A woman in a tailored suit began. Your performance during Operation Valkyrie has generated considerable interest at the highest levels of national security. Nova's jaw tightened. Ma'am, I'm not sure what operation you're referring to. I've been assigned to vehicle maintenance for 3 years. Cut the act, Phantom. The voice was one she hadn't heard in years. Colonel Marcus Webb, her former Delta Force commander. He stepped forward, a file in hand, and spread satellite photos across the table. Images before and after the assault. The compound burning. Bodies marked by thermal imaging. 40 hostile combatants eliminated. 6 Americans alive. Single operator infiltration and extraction, Webb said quietly. Combat effectiveness ratio that breaks every statistical model. Nova's mask held steady, but inside something shifted. For years she had lived as a ghost. Now they were pulling her back into the light. The woman leaned closer, her tone sharp but not unkind. Sergeant Anderson, the world is changing. Conventional operations are bound by politics, treaties, media scrutiny. But the threats keep growing. We need answers that don't exist in the manual. She tapped a tablet displaying a map littered with red markers. hostage situations, disputed territories, fragile outposts, places where official forces could not act. Webb's voice cut in. We're building something new, deep cover positions, roles that look harmless. Motor pool sergeants supply clerks, administrative staff, but with skills like yours, invisible until the moment you're needed. The words landed like a weight on her chest. It was everything she had been living for 3 years, but now they wanted to make it permanent. A network of ghosts hidden in plain sight. "What about my current assignment?" she asked carefully. "You remain Staff Sergeant Anderson, motor pool supervisor," Webb replied. "But your maintenance duties now include problems that don't officially exist." The table was quiet, every eye fixed on her. She felt their expectation, their certainty that she would say yes. And inside, a familiar calm spread. The same calm she'd felt holding a rifle in the dark. The same calm she'd felt stepping into fire. "I accept," she said simply. Webb closed the file. "Welcome to the most important job you'll never be able to discuss. Nova, your country needs mechanics who fix problems others can't even see." Her pulse steadied. She was still a ghost, still invisible, but now invisibility had a purpose. And somewhere in the silence of her chest, she felt the old weight shift into something else. Not pride, not glory, something quieter. Resolve. Because sometimes the world didn't need heroes. Sometimes it just needed someone willing to get their hands dirty. And Nova Anderson was very, very good at that. What did it mean to start over when you were never supposed to exist? 2 months after that briefing, Nova's orders came down like any other transfer. Routine, unremarkable. Staff Sergeant Anderson, motor pool supervisor, reassigned to forward operating base Kestrel, Cormarmac Peninsula. On paper, it was nothing. Another mechanic shuffled across the chessboard of a war without end. But Nova knew better. Cormarmac wasn't just another troubled spot. It was a wound bleeding from 3 directions at once, nations clawing over disputed borders, militant groups carving sanctuaries out of valleys, intelligence services trading pawns in a game that would never end. Everyone wanted it. No one controlled it. The peninsula was the kind of place where a mistake could ignite a region. And it was exactly the kind of place where ghosts were needed. The flight in was uneventful. C-17 cargo hold rattling with noise and darkness. Around her sat infantry replacements, young faces already heavy with fatigue. They didn't look twice at her. Just another mechanic, another grease monkey headed for the pits. She kept her posture quiet, her expression steady. Wrench. That was the mask. But inside her duffel, beneath wrenches and socket sets, lay another truth. Gear they would never catalog. Weapons that didn't exist on any manifest. Tools of a different trade. Fob Kestrel was smaller than Phoenix had been. Dustier. More fragile. Rows of prefabricated buildings crouched under endless sky, their walls scarred with patches from old mortar fire. The motor pool was functional but thin. 2 bays, a parts shed, and a handful of mechanics who looked too young to shave. She greeted them with a nod, played her role, rolled up her sleeves. Engines roared, bolts cracked free, grease stained her palms. Within days she was just another worker, swallowed by routine. Except the routine was a lie. Her garage came with new shadows, tools hidden in false drawers, radios that didn't reach normal frequencies. A back wall compartment containing items her mechanics would never see, custom optics, encrypted sat phones, explosives that could disappear into a toolbox. Her cover was complete, invisible, just as Webb had promised. But invisibility didn't erase the weight. Some nights she lay awake listening to the distant thrum of artillery, staring at the ceiling, asking herself if she was still a soldier or something else entirely. A mechanic who killed in silence. A ghost no one would thank. A woman who fixed what others broke and broke what threatened others. The questions pressed at her, but she never let them leak onto her face. Not here, not in front of anyone. Her first activation came on her 3rd day. It was mid-morning. She was halfway under a supply truck when her encrypted phone buzzed against her ribs. The others didn't notice. The sound of impact wrenches masked everything. She slid out slowly, wiped her hands, and walked into the parts shed. Alone, she read the message. Package malfunction. Immediate attention required. Coordinates attached. She stared at the words, her throat tight. Package malfunction wasn't a metaphor. It meant Americans in danger, a mission gone sideways, an official rescue deemed impossible. She looked out at the dust-choked yard where her junior mechanics argued over a stubborn engine. None of them knew the ground was shifting beneath their boots. None of them knew she would walk out as a mechanic and return, if she returned at all, with the silence of blood on her shoulders. Nova set her jaw, tucked the phone away, and began preparing. She moved through the garage like nothing was wrong. Checked inventory, gave a few casual orders, made notes in the logbook. To them, she was the sergeant keeping engines alive. To herself, she was rehearsing the rhythm that had saved her life too many times before. She checked her truck, ostensibly for a test drive, then quietly loaded the compartments with the gear she would need. By the time the sun dropped low, she was ready. Driving out, she didn't feel fear. She felt that dangerous calm again, the stillness that made her efficient and merciless. The roads twisted toward coordinates that marked a hostile valley. Intelligence had warned of smugglers, armed, disciplined, tied to larger groups, officially untouchable. Unofficially, a fire that needed to be smothered before it spread. As the base receded behind her, she thought of what Webb had said. We're establishing a network of operators in non-combat positions. Mechanics, clerks, drivers, invisible until the moment you're needed. And she wondered, was this survival? Or was this slow disappearance, piece by piece, into a life where her name meant nothing and her face was never remembered? The truck rattled over loose stones, headlights off, the night swallowing her whole. She tightened her grip on the wheel. She had chosen this, chosen the silence. And now, silence demanded payment again. What does a valley remember after the gunfire fades? The road into Cormormac's interior narrowed into switchbacks carved by time and weather, more suited to goats than trucks. Nova's modified M1078 rumbled low, engine muted by the tricks she'd taught it, exhaust redirected, gears smoothed, armor disguised under grime. It looked like a supply hauler. It moved like a predator. She cut the headlights half a mile from the target grid. Darkness became her cover, but also her test. Every dip in the road could hide an ambush. Every shadow on the ridge might be a rifle scope. She felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the edge of fear sharpened into focus. She stopped the truck in a dry creek bed, concealed by brush and rock. From here she'd go on foot. She stripped off the grease-stained coveralls, folded them neatly, and slid them under the driver's seat. In their place, black tactical fabric, plates hugged close, night vision over her brow. She cinched her gloves, feeling herself vanish into a role that was truer than the one she wore in daylight. The target was a smuggler compound, small compared to the fortress in Kakovia, but no less dangerous. Intelligence suggested 20 fighters. Smugglers, yes, but armed with military-grade rifles and disciplined enough to be considered more than rabble. Inside, 2 American contractors, communications specialists who had walked into a sting they never saw coming. Officially, their existence here was classified, which meant officially no one would save them. Except the mechanic. Nova's boots found the slope in silence. She moved with the patience of someone who had been taught that rushing meant dying. Each step was a negotiation with the earth. Don't let the rock tumble, don't let the brush snap. She listened more than she looked. A cough carried on the wind, the clink of a weapon strap, human sounds woven into the fabric of night. At 300 meters she stopped, raised her scope. Through the green glow of night vision the compound emerged, a scattering of stone buildings ringed by fences, floodlights, and the restless pace of armed men. They weren't drunk, weren't lazy. Their posture was professional. That made them harder, but it also made them predictable. She counted again. 19 outside, at least 3 more shapes moving inside. Call it 22, a number she could live with. Her breath slowed. The calm came, the kind that felt like slipping into water too cold for comfort, a place where emotion froze and only calculation remained. She chose her first target, the generator shack, always the heart. She ghosted down the slope, hugging the earth until the hum of machinery pressed into her ears. One guard leaned on a rifle, half watching the perimeter. He never heard her. The knife slid clean, her hand steady. She caught his body before it touched the ground, easing him into the dirt like a secret. The charge she set on the fuel line was small, almost delicate. When it blew, it would cut power, not draw eyes from miles away. She whispered the timer into place, then moved. Around the compound, she traced the edges of human blindness. Guards smoking, muttering in a language she half understood. A pair arguing about cards. She marked each with the mental patience of a surgeon. Then she found what she was looking for. A barred window, 2 figures inside tied to chairs. Faces swollen, lips cracked but breathing. Americans. Her chest tightened at the sight because she saw not just prisoners but proof of the cost of silence. Men who would be forgotten if she failed. She retreated to her vantage point, watched the compound again, waited. The explosion came soft, like a sigh. The generator stuttered, lights flickering before dying into black. Shouts cut the night, beams of flashlights flaring, men stumbling into chaos. Nova moved with the darkness. Her rifle spoke in suppressed whispers, each shot measured, each target chosen. A guard near the prisoner's building crumpled. Another dropped before he finished turning his head. The night became confusion shouts, gunfire flaring at shadows, men firing blind. Inside, fear surged in her veins, but she rode it like a wave. Fear made her precise, made her alive. She breached the prison building with a shaped charge, the door splitting inward. Dust. Shouts. She was through before anyone could react, her rifle barking in short, merciless bursts. 3 men dropped, the room falling silent except for the rasp of the prisoner's breath. "American," one of them croaked. "Quiet," she whispered, slicing ropes. Their wrists were raw, their faces pale, but they could move. She pressed weapons into their hands, enemy rifles, good enough for what came next. "Extraction," one asked, voice trembling between hope and disbelief. "North Slope, my truck." They stared at her, not at the weapon in her hands, but at her face, as if they couldn't understand who she was. She didn't explain, she didn't have time. Outside, the compound was unraveling. Men shouted commands into radios that no longer worked, tried to rally against an enemy they couldn't see. Nova guided the contractors through the smoke and noise, her shots carving a path. Each man she dropped was a choice, a calculation, and each one pressed heavier on her chest. By the time they reached the slope, the compound was fire and confusion behind them. She glanced once, seeing men scrambling, weapons flashing in the dark. Then she turned away, not because she didn't care, but because she couldn't. Her mission wasn't to punish, it was to save. At the truck, she bundled the contractors inside, checked them quick for wounds. Both battered, both bleeding, but alive. She climbed into the driver's seat, turned the key, and the engine roared to life like a secret weapon. The road out was worse than the road in. Men fired from ridges, bullets sparking off armor she'd hidden beneath layers of ordinary steel. She drove like the truck was part of her body, swerving, grinding gears, forcing the machine to survive. The contractors clung to the bench, silent but wide-eyed, watching the woman who wasn't supposed to exist. When the base finally came into view, its floodlights cutting through night, she felt her chest unclench for the first time. She slowed only at the checkpoint, waving the guards down with a grease-stained badge. To them, she was just wrench again, a mechanic returning from a supply run. Inside the base, medics rushed the contractors away. Officers whispered, questions sparked, but no one asked her anything. No one ever did. Back in the motor pool, she scrubbed blood from her hands until only grease remained. Alone, Staring at the reflection in a cracked mirror, she asked herself the question that never went away. How many times could she do this before the silence swallowed her whole? What happens when whispers grow louder than orders? The contractors had lived. That was the mission's measure, at least on paper. 2 men returned to American hands, battered but breathing. The smugglers. Their compound was reduced to smoke and ash. Yet inside Nova, the victory felt hollow. She didn't feel triumph, didn't feel pride. She felt the silence settling deeper into her bones, the kind that carried more weight each time she wore it. Back at the motor pool, days bled into routine again. Engines came and went. Oil stained her palms. The younger mechanics cracked jokes about her being a workaholic. Wrench never sleeps, they teased. She smiled when she needed to, stayed quiet when she didn't. None of them saw the nights she sat alone in the parts shed, staring at her encrypted phone, waiting for it to buzz again. And in that waiting, the whispers began. They started in the chow hall, drifting across plastic trays and half-eaten rations. You hear about that op in the valley, 2 Americans pulled out. No QRF, no drones, just gone. Another voice, low and uncertain. Word is someone inside did it, some ghost, not command. Ghost, the word scraped against her like glass. At first she thought it was just rumor, the kind that always fills the gaps when soldiers don't get the full story. But then she noticed the glances. A corporal watching her a second too long. A lieutenant's conversation stalling when she walked past. People didn't suspect, not really, but they sensed. And sensing was dangerous. One night as she scrubbed grease from under her nails, she caught her own reflection in the mirror above the sink. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, harsh and colorless. For a moment she didn't see Wrench, the mechanic. She saw Phantom staring back. Cold eyes. A face carrying the weight of people she'd killed and people she'd saved. She whispered, almost to herself, "How long before the mask cracks?" Her answer came sooner than she wanted. A week after the Valley mission, Major Harlow, the base commander, summoned her. His office was cramped, papers stacked high, the air heavy with stale coffee. He didn't look at her right away. Instead, he tapped a report on his desk. "Sergeant Anderson, I've had some interesting requests from higher. Maintenance records, vehicle logs, even personnel hours." He leaned back, eyes narrowing. "Strange, don't you think, that a motor pool sergeant is suddenly of such interest?" Nova's heart thudded once, heavy and slow. She kept her face unreadable. "Sir, I can provide any records they need. My section keeps detailed logs." Harlow studied her. "You've always been thorough, too thorough, some would say." He paused, searching her expression. "And yet, when rumors reach my desk about impossible rescues, I start to wonder. Do you know what I mean, Sergeant?" She held his gaze, steady as stone. "No, sir, I'm a mechanic. I fix what's broken." The silence stretched between them, taut as wire. Finally, Harlow sighed, rubbing his temples. "That's what I thought. Get back to work, Anderson. Keep the fleet running. That's all I need from you." She saluted and left, her boots echoing down the hall. But inside, she knew the cover was thinner now. Later that night, she sat on her cot, staring at her encrypted phone. It hadn't buzzed since the valley. She almost wished it would. The waiting gnawed at her more than the action. In the silence, doubt seeped in. She remembered the faces of the men she'd killed. Some were young, no older than the mechanics she supervised. She remembered their eyes when they realized death had come from someone they couldn't see. She asked herself, as she had after every mission, was this justice, or just another kind of maintenance, fixing the problem by breaking it beyond repair? Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock. She stiffened. No one visited her quarters unannounced. "Come in," she said carefully. The door creaked open. Lieutenant Commander Hayes stepped inside. The SEAL she'd pulled out of Kakovia months ago. His face bore faint scars now, his movements slower, but his eyes were sharp. "I had a stopover," he said quietly, closing the door. "Thought I'd see the famous mechanic." Nova frowned. "You shouldn't be here." "Neither should you," he replied. He sat on the edge of the cot studying her. "I've been hearing things about the valley, about a ghost." Her jaw tightened. "Rumors." Hayes shook his head. "I know what rumors sound like, and I know what it feels like to wake up alive because someone broke every rule to make it happen." He leaned closer. "You can deny it, Nova. Hell, maybe you have to, but just know word's spreading, and sooner or later the wrong person will listen." She looked away, staring at the metal locker in the corner. "Then I'll keep doing what I do best, stay invisible." Hayes chuckled softly, though it held no humor. "Invisible doesn't last forever, not for people like us." When he left, the room felt smaller. The silence pressed heavier. Nova lay back on her cot, staring at the ceiling. She told herself she was ready for the next call, ready to vanish into the night again. But a different fear had begun to creep in, not fear of dying. Fear of being seen. Because once you're seen, you can never go back to being a ghost. What does it cost to save others and still remain unseen? The call came just after midnight. Nova was in the motor pool, half asleep on a workbench with an oil-stained rag under her head when the encrypted phone buzzed. The vibration was faint but unmistakable, the sound that tore her from one life and thrust her into another. She sat up, throat dry, and read the message. "Immediate activation. Package compromised. Grid coordinates attached. Priority, prevent capture." She stared at the words, feeling her chest tighten. Prevent capture. That meant the clock was already ticking. Someone out there was about to disappear into the dark, and once they were gone, there would be no coming back. She moved fast, coveralls shed, tactical gear on. The truck, already modified, rolled out of the motor pool without a second glance from the gate guards. Wrench was just doing another overnight run. No one questioned the quiet mechanic. The coordinates led her east toward a narrow gorge where the terrain squeezed like a fist. Her intelligence feed, limited but precise, showed a U.S. convoy had been ambushed, 3 vehicles disabled, survivors scattered, enemy forces closing in to take prisoners. Nova drove hard, headlights off, the truck leaping over rocks and ruts. Dust trailed behind her like a phantom tail. The gorge opened ahead, firelight flickering against its walls. She cut the engine, slid out, and crawled forward with rifle in hand. The scene below was chaos. 2 American vehicles burned, sending black smoke into the night. The third lay on its side, wheels still spinning. A handful of survivors crouched behind shattered armor, returning fire with desperation more than precision. Across the gorge, enemy fighters advanced with methodical steps, disciplined, relentless. Nova counted at least 30. She pressed her cheek to the stock of her rifle, breath steady. One shot dropped a fighter mid-stride. Another silenced the man aiming an RPG. Suppressed cracks echoed like whispers, and men began to fall without warning. Confusion spread among the attackers, heads whipping toward shadows that weren't there. The survivors below noticed. One of them shouted, "Cover fire, someone's out there." Hope in his voice, but also fear, because when you do know where your help comes from, you don't know if you can trust it. Nova shifted position, never firing more than twice from the same angle. Her shots were surgical. The heavy machine gunner slumped forward, the squad leader pointing orders crumpled mid-gesture. The enemy advanced slowed, then faltered. But they weren't broken. A flare shot skyward, bathing the gorge in harsh white light. For the first time, Nova felt exposed. Fighters spotted her silhouette against the rocks and opened fire. Bullets sparked around her, chewing stone into dust. She rolled, pressed flat, returned fire with ruthless calm. 2 more went down. She switched to her pistol, close quarters now, the world reduced to flash and recoil. The survivors scrambled from their wreck, making a break for the rocks. One was hit, collapsing with a cry. Nova sprinted down the slope, crossing open ground she'd sworn never to risk. She dragged the wounded man behind cover, her hands slick with his blood. He looked up at her, eyes wide, seeing her face in the pale flare light. "You're not motor pool," he whispered. She didn't answer, she couldn't. She shoved a rifle into his hands. Keep firing. The others gathered around, their strength rallying under the cover she gave them. Together, they pushed back against the fighters. The enemy, disoriented by the unseen hand cutting them down, began to retreat into the gorge's shadows. When the last gunfire faded, silence returned. Heavy, suffocating. Survivors slumped against the rocks, gasping, wounded, alive. They looked at her, this grease-stained sergeant-turned-phantom warrior, and their faces were full of questions. "Who the hell are you?" one asked. Nova's eyes swept over them. 5 men still standing, 2 wounded, 1 dead. She felt the weight of each number settle into her bones. "I'm nobody," she said flatly. "You were never here, neither was I." They stared, confusion and disbelief mixing with gratitude. Hayes had been right. Rumors were spreading, and now these men would carry their own. They had seen her fight, seen her kill, seen her save, and no cover story could erase what was burned into memory. She led them out of the gorge, guiding them to the truck hidden in the brush. The survivors climbed in, still silent, still watching her like she was something other than human. She drove them back to base, headlights off, the road long and narrow. When they reached the checkpoint, she slipped back into her role. Coveralls pulled over her gear, grease smeared across her cheeks. She waved the guards with her tired mechanic's smile. But the men in the back, those who'd seen her truth, kept their silence too. Not because they believed her cover, but because they understood. In the motor pool, she cleaned her hands again, scrubbed until the smell of blood gave way to the familiar sting of oil. Alone in the dim light, she whispered the question that haunted her more with each mission. How long can a ghost remain invisible when the living keep telling stories about her? What does dignity sound like when it refuses to speak? The base moved on as though nothing had happened. Convoys rolled out. Radios crackled with static and orders. Soldiers drifted between barracks and chow halls, laughing too loud, living as though death hadn't brushed so close. But Nova felt it everywhere, in the looks that lingered, in the rumors whispered just low enough for her to hear. They were talking about the gorge, about the survivors who came back swearing they'd been saved by someone no one could name. A shadow, a ghost. Nova tightened bolts, checked fluids, signed logbooks. She played the part until grease caked her knuckles. But every time she caught her reflection in a windshield or a puddle of oil, she saw the fracture widening. Wrench and Phantom, 2 names pulling at one body, and sooner or later one of them would kill the other. The encrypted phone buzzed again. Priority, high-value target, deniable strike, immediate action. She read it twice, then a third time. This one was different, not a rescue, not prevention, elimination. The kind of mission that left no poetry, only silence. That night she moved again. Coveralls peeled away. Truck disguised as routine transport. Miles of dirt road unspooled under her tires until the world shrank to coordinates and timing. The target was a villa on the edge of a contested town. Inside, an insurgent financier whose reach fueled half the region's violence. Officially untouchable, unofficially necessary. Guards paced the walls, rifles slung, cigarettes glowing. From a distance it looked like strength. Up close it looked like routine. Nova dismantled routine. The first guard dropped with a suppressed crack. The second with a knife drawn across the space between heartbeats. Charges placed with surgical care folded the villa inward, flames climbing into the night. By the time the fire settled, the man who funded death no longer existed. And neither did she. Back at base the next morning, she stood in the motor pool with grease under her nails, answering questions about overdue parts shipments. No one mentioned the villa burning on the horizon. No one dared. But in the silence that followed, Nova felt something shift. Hayes had warned her, invisible doesn't last forever. And now she saw it, the way men in the chow line studied her without speaking, the way officers paused mid-sentence when she entered a room. They didn't know the truth, not fully, but they knew enough. And knowing was dangerous. Weeks passed. Missions came and went. Each time she returned to her cover, the grease felt heavier on her hands, as though it carried all the blood she refused to remember. One evening, alone in the garage, she sat on the edge of a half-repaired truck and let the silence settle. She thought of the SEALs, of the contractors, of the men in the gorge who had looked at her like she was something inhuman. She thought of the enemies too, the faces that blurred into numbers, the bodies that fell without ceremony. She wondered what the valley remembered, what the villa remembered, what the mountains whispered when no one listened. Did they carry her secrets, or did they simply bury them? Her phone buzzed once more. Another message, another problem to fix. She didn't move. Not yet. She sat there, breathing in oil and dust, and let herself feel the weight she always buried. The loneliness of invisibility, the exhaustion of silence, the truth that no medal, no recognition, no whispered rumor could ever balance the ledger of lives taken and lives saved. And in that moment, she understood something she had never said out loud. She didn't need anyone to see her. She didn't need anyone to know. Because some dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.